All right. So please note that you are looking at a PDF that I shared here. Okay, and the PDF consists of 5 pages. One is called the Chinese Exclusion Act, Emergency Quota Act, Immigration Act, Angel Islands, and then you have this last kind of pie chart here that you're working with. So when you're doing this particular assignment, all right, when you're doing this particular assignment, you're looking at ways our country limited immigration. All right. So these are laws. The Chinese Exclusion Act is a law. The Emergency Quota Act is a law. The Immigration Act of 1924 is a law, and so on and so forth. So how did us as Americans, how did our government limit the amount of immigrants coming in? What would they do? Now, some of these policies are going to be kind of borderline on the fact that they were pretty racist, even at the time. Okay? When we look at the first one, you're really going to see that. But our focus as a country is to make sure we don't become overpopulated and overcrowded, because that's where some big problems start to happen. So if you notice the tab that I'm sharing, the Chinese Exclusion Act. Let's see, do I have a hand raiser? All right, so limiting immigration in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Okay, I think someone maybe raised their hand, but I didn't see who. So why were the Chinese so unwelcome compared to other European immigrants? So you're going to go through each one. So the first one's the Chinese Exclusion Act. You go to that. You do the reading. Okay, so the first 2 questions will be in this reading here. Not long. Okay. Then you go back to the next question. The Emergency Quota Acts, questions 3 and 4. Okay. You're going to scroll down to eventually 3 and 4 here. All right. I'm going to do the first one with you. All right. We'll do the Chinese Exclusion Act together, and then you guys are going to do the rest on your own. All right. So you'll see how I do this. We'll read through it. So first, we'll just read through it like we do. The Chinese Exclusion Act. Okay. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 prohibited all Chinese laborers from entering the United States. So what's another word for a laborer? If you were someone who does labor.
A person that's working.
Good. Okay, it's not an immigrant. Good try. A laborer is someone who is working. So we're going to limit Chinese workers from entering the United States. Excellent. The law also prevented current Chinese immigrants from becoming American citizens. So remember, black people could become citizens, but if you were Chinese, you were not allowed to in 1882. It made it very difficult for them to visit China and return to the United States. It was originally last for 10 years, but it was renewed in 1892 and made permanent in 1902. Chinese immigrants already living in the United States challenged the law in American courts, but all of their efforts ultimately failed. This was the first immigration law designed to restrict a particular ethnic group from entering the United States. It was motivated by both racial and economic concerns. Chinese were unwelcome due to their racial and cultural differences with white Americans. We talked about this yesterday, right? In addition, Americans feared that Chinese workers would accept lower pay and keep wages low for all workers. This law was a very successful one that it accomplished its goal. The Chinese population in the U.S. declined sharply, meaning we had a lot less Chinese people, and then Chinese immigrants did not receive citizenship until 1943. So in 2020, does this law still exist? No. Of course, Chinese people are welcome to come to the country. But for a span of about 20 to 30 years, Chinese workers were not allowed to enter the country. Now, the reason really happens to be because so many of them were coming in and taking jobs away from the native-born Americans, and the government wanted to limit this. Okay? They also went after how the Chinese looked and acted, which was obviously wrong, but that's what the government did back in this American history. Okay? So what you're doing is, okay, answering these 2 questions. Number 1, why were the Chinese so unwelcome compared to other European immigrants? Okay? Anyone want to unmute themselves or write in the chat what the answer to number 1 is? Why were they so unwelcome? Why the Chinese specifically?
They accepted less pay for jobs.
Okay, they were taking jobs. What else?
The way they look.
Excellent. Okay, the way they looked was a lot.
Their race, their color, their culture, their
Beliefs.
beliefs, and their appearances.
Right. So it was a lot different than a lot of the typical Americans back then. So they were unwelcome because of that. Now, that is obviously, looking through our 2020 lenses, very wrong. Okay? That was very wrong. And, when laws like this happen, they're a really unfortunate thing. So, we have this notion sometimes that, in American history, it was just, let's say, African Americans that were just mistreated. There's been plenty of groups that have been mistreated. But the good thing is we've always improved and gotten better from that time in American history. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think that's why we learn history, to make sure today we've moved on and improved from that situation. Number 2, how did the Chinese Exclusion Act limit immigrants from coming into the United States? Okay, what did it specifically say? Someone unmute yourself or put in the chat. How did the Chinese Exclusion Act limit immigrants? What did it say? It's probably more obvious than the question is making it seem.
It's opening a kitchen. Could I use my finger?
It said they can't become citizens.
Okay, excellent. So that is part of it. They can't become citizen. Okay.
That they work for less.
Okay, so they did work for less, but not necessarily. That's not really answering the question. So the Chinese Exclusion Act limited immigrants coming from the United States by, I'll put it here in the chat.
They send them home.
Right. Not allowing Chinese workers to enter the country. All right. They're going to do the same thing for the Emergency Quota Act, the Immigration Act, and the Angel Islands. And then there's one more here, 9 and 10, if you get to it. You guys got about 16 minutes to do it. I think it is something you can finish if you work hard, but as per usual, it is due by the end of the day today. Yeah, Jane, no matter how they look or how they cope, yeah, absolutely. That's a inarguable statement. All right, so get to this. I'll be taking attendance. And let me know if you have any questions. And the next thing I'm about to say is just for my students watching the YouTube. My students that are watching the YouTube and missed the lesson, I started the video late. Please copy down this focus question. Okay, and what's in red and what's in green here, we're looking at the main reasons why some of the immigrants were not treated very well, all right, when they came to the country by the American people, and why the government then started to limit immigration because of all the new immigrants coming in. So you guys copy this down into your notebook. All right. And yes, Emma, look at Shanika or look at Jane's response. Okay, they were not so welcome because of the way they looked. And that's the unfortunate reality of the situation there.